Hello everybody. Oh, I just realised my hair's up still, which is a bit of a nuisance. I don't like it being up when I'm reading because it's weird. Anyway, there you go. Sorted. I am back, but not in full fighting fit health at the moment. Still have pains in the gut, but not bedridden, so that's good. Hopefully there will be no further issues. So hi, how are you? Wherever you are in the world, I hope you're well. And if you're not, I hope we can provide a little bit of light entertainment for you. Now, today we've got a new book. We finished Hugh Lofting's The Story of Dr. Dolittle, the first of the Dr. Dolittle books last week. And I wasn't able to read for you on Monday this week. Excuse me. Don't know why my voice sounds a little bit rattly to me. Maybe it doesn't to you. That's okay. My green screen's a bit weird at the moment. Sorry about that. I should see if I can tweak it a little bit for you. Just sit still for a minute while I have a go at fixing the green screen. Let's see what's going to happen with it. It's a little bit better, isn't it? I think so. Yep, that'll probably do. Maybe do a little bit of that. Just softens the edges of things. That will do. There. I was really missing reading on Monday. Tuesday, yesterday, I was also thinking, oh, I really missed reading to you guys. Anyway, here we are. What's up? Apart from that, I think everything's doing okay. I'm umming a lot. Yeah, I know. It's terrible. I have been working behind the scenes on getting some things set up. Oh, I need to give you some chat functions. There you go. Chat is turned on. If you are here and wanting to chat, now you can. I've turned on some chat functions. And also I'm trying to get it so there's the stream system shows a few things, like if somebody chats for the first time, it actually acknowledges that they chat for the first time, things like that. We haven't got a lot else going on there yet, just the first time chatters. But eventually we'll get there with other things. It'll probably, if you've already chatted here before, it'll probably still show you as a first time chatter the first time you chat today, just because I had to reset some things to do with it. But I'm trying to get it so it will also tell us if there's a new follower or subscriber, or if there's any tips. Yay, Blue, great, it works. It works. Did you see it? Good to see it. I'm trying to get it so that we have a little bit more that actually happens that we can actually use while we're doing things. Now, I don't know the story at all that we're going to be having today. I have not read any books by this particular lady. I've read the occasional book by somebody else who writes a similar sort of story, but probably, from what I can gather, not as well. Now, this is not the best example of her work. It is semi-autobiographical in terms of it was her first book that she wrote, so therefore she put a lot more of herself into it in some ways, and also it's very much a product of its time, even though it was actually quite revolutionary. It and the subsequent books she wrote were quite revolutionary at the time as well. So the particular book we're reading today is called A Terrible Tomboy. And like I say, the author put herself into the story. That was probably how she got going with writing. But the rest of her books tend to be viewed as what they call schoolgirl stories. And she was the one who really got them going as a style of book writing. And her idea was that they were for the girls' entertainment rather than being moralistic and high-handed and teaching them how they ought to behave. Which, who wants to read a book like that? We'll probably read some in the future, but not today. But as a teenager or as a child, as a preteen, who would want to be preached at every time you're trying to do something just for light-hearted entertainment's sake? That's just the attitude that was around at the time. So this author was rather revolutionary in that respect. I'm trying to think, I'm pretty sure it's her books that at one stage were being removed from some schools. There are other books written by other people who had a similar idea with the type of story that, where it was a bunch of girls at school together. Now this one isn't set specifically at a school. Like I say, this one's a little bit different. We'll probably read some more of hers later on. But ones that are more familiar to a lot of other people are the Chalet School series, written by Eleanor Brent Dyer, and Enid Blyton's Mallory Towers and St. Clair's books. Now, those ones are set at boarding schools. What sets Angela Brazel's books apart? It's pronounced Brazil, even though it's written Brazil. If you look up any information about her, it makes a point of emphasising that it's Brazil, not Brazil, even though her great-grandmother was from Brazil. I think that may be how they came back with the family name. I'm not sure. Anyway, part of her impressions are based, to do with the school side of her writing later on, is because of her impressions from her mother's and her grandmother's stories coming from Brazil to England and then having to go into the school system and obviously talking about what it was like, how terrible it was being at boarding school in England, all that sort of stuff. Anyway, so because of that, she decided she was going to write some stuff that was a little bit alternative for a lot of people at the time. So she wasn't actually following a trend that other people had going. And so it was actually fairly fresh and new. To us, it may seem rather old-fashioned, rather been there, done that for the style of the stories that she tells. But at the time, very revolutionary, very new. And there were quite a few of the earlier authors, not a her era, but a little bit later than that, who were actually influenced by the books that she wrote, just the freedom for children to be children and enjoy themselves and have adventures, for stories to be written so that children could enjoy them. There were a lot more books like that sort of thing for boys already around from what I can gather, but for girls, definitely not. They were more about, this is how you ought to behave, and that was the main focus. I'm just skim reading a little bit of information here because I know there was some that I wanted to share with you. Sorry, I'll be with you in a moment. After, I think it was the Second World War, they sort of dropped out of popularity because you came up with a lot more of the mixed school systems and less of the boarding schools and things like that. So therefore, that was less popular. And also, what's unusual with her ones is most of the other boarding school stories were quite long series. In hers, you would have a maximum of usually 3 books set at any one school. Often you'd have a connected character or two, but not necessarily a great big long continuity between the stories of a location, so, being the boarding school. I know there was some stuff I wanted to share with you about her. I'm trying to find it. I did actually look through all this before. Okay, here's the little bit about the background with the school. Her long sequence of school stories did not commence until the publication of her second novel, The Fortunes of Philippa, which was published in 1906. This one was published in, and I'll tell you, 1904. So that's fairly early on for this sort of era of stories. So Fortunes of Philippa in 1906. The novel was based on her mother, Angelica Brazel, who had grown up in Rio de Janeiro and attended an English boarding school at the age of 10, finding the English culture, school life and climate confronting. So, like most other colonial children of a certain status, well, it wouldn't have been the colonial um, governing people if they didn't have that status. Um, I would guess that the mother was living in Rio de Janeiro when she was doing the first part of her growing up, and then she was sent back to England to have her education started and going on from there. And that was seems to be quite a common thing at one stage. Very, very common with those who were in the upper levels of the military over in India when England was in charge over in India, but also in other countries too, where you had family that were important society leaders and governmental leaders in different countries at the time. So that would be her mother's stories about what it was like going to school. Oh, when I was at school, it was like this, probably, sort of like, don't moan about it. It was much worse in my day, sort of thing. That sort of thing, I think, was a lot of that in what gave her the ideas, I think, for how to establish a series of stories that she could create. Um, So yeah, she had a lot of influence over the whole genre just because she was the one who first got it going. And then after that, you get the whole change with more and more people writing that sort of thing. And then with the Second World War and the changing of education systems and lifestyles and things like that, that it lost its appeal. Although it has actually come into a little bit more appeal again since then because it was, for some people, it's a looking back into a previous time with a sense of fondness for how innocent the world was. Yes and no, I have to say. There's a lot of stuff which we think, oh, it wasn't that bad back then. Well, if you go back to the Victorian era, you've got people dying on the street of starvation, of illness. I don't think that's any easier than what life is now in the Western world. So anyway, that sort of stuff. Right. How about we get on with actually just reading them? Reading this one anyway. I've got the book up in front of me just so I can see if I need any pictures. I'm pretty sure that the one I've got on my iPad mini, yes, you can hear me scrolling, on my iPad mini is actually the one with the illustrations. I do hope so. Right. Sorry, itchy ears. I'm not sure why. They just are. And let's start with hi for all the new people. Hi, I'm Jev. I read old-fashioned children's books. No, actually, I read old children's books. They're not just old-fashioned, because old-fashioned implies made in that style. These are actually old children's books. Sort of like this one. Yes, I did give a tweak to my green screen settings, and so therefore this one goes half invisible. This one was published, no, it was gifted to my great uncle, I think it was, my grandmother's brother, in 125 years ago. In July this year, it was 125 years ago, he was gifted that book. And the family still has it because books were important, they were expensive, and so therefore you looked after them and you valued them, which is why I grew up reading all these old books that were passed on, hand-me-down books, because they were there, they were free. And so we kept them. I've got a whole lot of books in boxes downstairs. And eventually, when I get the space behind my green screen sorted out, so it is not the storage space for the house, but it has bookshelves and sofas and chairs and a nice reading area and things like that, then I won't be needing the green screen. I will actually just be sitting here talking to you. And when I get it to that stage, I will have books on those bookshelves and I'll be able to wave them at you and read from actual books. I've done one or two like that up till now, but that's okay. We'll get to some more at some stage. In the meantime, I read from a first generation iPad mini, which is also hand-me-down. Why not? Keep the tech going if you can. It can still go online and download the ebooks that I want to read, and it can still show me the ebooks so I can read them to you. And that's the important thing. I like the fact that it's keeping the tech out of trash. It's probably so old that they can't even recycle it now. not with any effect in terms of people having the money to put into pulling it apart and taking out all the componentry in a way that would actually be effective. Right, I'm trying to find the first page of the book, so I'm ready to read to you. Right, so that's who I am and what I do, and I do have 3 tips for you if you're a new arrival on my channel. So the 3 tips are drinks, snacks, and comfortable. So drinks, make sure you have some water to drink. You must have water to drink. It keeps your brain working and your body. And also, if you can, a favourite drink is also good. So I've got nice plain unstrong, nice weak black coffee because my stomach is tolerating it fairly well. And I do actually have some water in something which isn't as easy to tip over, and that's lukewarm, so my stomach doesn't rebel against it. Yeah, I've had gut trouble this week. That's why I missed reading on Monday. So that's drinks, snacks. What have we got in the snack jar today? We have exciting plain crackers in their rattly packet, and I may or may not remember to eat some. I hope you've got something with you. If not, when I get to a chapter break, then rush off, go and get them, and then come back. And then make yourself comfortable. It's easier to enjoy a story if you're sitting somewhere comfortable. So here's a cushion just to remind me that you need to get comfortable. When I'm sitting reading just for myself, I do the same. I will get somewhere on a comfortable seat, or lie on a comfortable bed, or on the corner of the floor on the landing, in our stairwell, because it's nice and quiet and it's not too bright or anything like. Oh, my hair's sticking up all over the place, and all those sort of things. And it's just a great space to be in. So that's the 3 tips. I do have a bonus tip for you, actually. The bonus tip is a note, paper and pencil. Some note paper and pencil, or pen, or something to write with. You can actually use whatever it is that you want to take your notes. But we often come across words that we don't understand, words that are new to us, but they've obviously been around a long time. They've probably been around so long that they're no longer in use. Places that we want to look up on the map, or places we want to look for photographs of to be able to visualize what something is like. It builds a broader picture and understanding of the stories that we read. So often I will write, even though I'm the one who's doing the reading, often I'll pause and I'll start writing notes. So if you see me looking down here like this, I'll be writing notes about some word that I want to look up, to check up on later. Just that sort of thing. It's handy. So I think that's it. We don't have any more introductions that we need to give, do we? Anyway, we'll carry on. So I'm reading A Terrible Tomboy by Angela Brazel. This is the first time we have read this book, and it's the first time, as far as I know, that I've read anything by this particular author. She's English. The book was published in 1904. Sorry, my brain just went blank. Oh, yeah, that's a little bit of information I didn't give you in my intro. I am very likely ADHD and ASD, and it means that I get distracted very, very easily, but also when I get distracted, I go off on a rabbit trail. It can be a really deep rabbit trail with lots and lots of information involved with it. So she was born in 1868. This particular book was published in 1904. 6804. Do you want to work that one out? 36, I think. That makes it when she published this one. There were a couple of books before that, but they were not ones that were the same sort of books. They were sort of like fairy books and things like that, which don't seem to have any particular significance because nobody's bothered to put them up on Project Gutenberg or anything like that. She wrote quite a few, by the way. And so now we are going to read them. Read this one anyway. And I shall give you I shall give you a jigsaw puzzle. I know I was going to do that. I had it ready. This is what happens when I start thinking about other things that might need doing along the way, as I get totally distracted. And some things happen and some things don't. Right, here we go. Put that in there. And I need to do the interact so I can get that set up. I'll put that onto my other screen. I'm going to leave that at 100 puzzle pieces, and then we can decide next time if we actually need more or less. I shall copy the link and put it into my commands so you can use the command. And if anyone else arrives, they can also use the command, or someone else can tell them. Use the command for them. That's what I mean by tell them. You don't have to tell them, just pass the information on. Oh, I was going to get rid of the that bit so it looks a bit tidier. Jigsaw, there it is. Put the command in. No, I don't do this with keyboard shortcuts. The changing the command. I don't have that stuck in my head. Yeah, thank you for putting in the disclaimer. That's a good idea. Right, there you go. We have the jigsaw puzzle thing ready to go. Q, welcome and thank you for lurking. That's awesome. I'm just wondering if I need to set up a slurk command, which is for those who are lurking and possibly sleeping. I could use the snoozy emote for that one, couldn't I? Anyway, just a thought. Anyway, you're all ready to go on that jigsaw puzzle, and I am going to get on with actually reading the story. I don't think there's anything else I need to put in here. Yeah, I'm glad you put up the disclaimer. I'm just going to read that out loud for those who are over on YouTube who aren't going to see any of the commands or chat or anything like that. And maybe you want to come and join us live on Twitch sometime instead of just watching the recordings over on YouTube, but that's okay if you can't. So what it says on the disclaimer is, this stream includes works of fiction, autobiographies or biographies. Any references to events, people or places, real, imaginary, past or present, are used at the discretion of the author's memories. The author, not the streamer, okay? The author's memories, imaginations, and external sources. These works may include negative depictions, slang, terminology, treatment of people or culture, mistreatment of people or cultures, which may trigger some audiences. Rather than remove or alter the content, we acknowledge its impact with reasonable and moderated conversation. So if we need to discuss it, then what you do is you go across to our Discord server and get into conversation over there. And if it's appropriate, yes, we can discuss it. If it's just making grumbly comments about the attitudes that people used to have and how wonderful we are now and how we don't have these horrible attitudes, don't bother, because I know that we have some horrible attitudes in this day and age, and people have to have the opportunity to grow and change. So there you go. And I will give you the link for the Discord server. And then partway through, if the chapter's not too long, I shall give you a break, and when I'm taking a chapter break, and I'll probably give you a few other links that you can follow up to. Okay, so here we go. We're reading A Terrible Tomboy by Angela Brazel, and it's her first of her consistent books that she started to write, rather than the fairy tales which she started with, which is sort of like 4 and they didn't really go anywhere. Right, Chapter 1, Peggy at Home. Good sooth, I know not, be she wench or swain, her face proclaims her one, her deeds the other. A quote from somewhere, and I have no idea where. Sorry. Peggy, Peggy, where are you? Peggy! Aunt Helen wants you. Oh, Peggy, do be quick. Wherever are you hiding? Getting no response to her calls, the speaker, a pretty, fair-haired girl of 15, flung her brown holland cooking apron over her head and ran out across the farmyard into the lightly falling rain. So I think that means that she didn't actually have it tied on, she just held it over her head. Otherwise she's running blind across the farmyard. The pictures it conjures in my imagination splat. And holland, by the way, I think in this context is a particular either style or fabric type. You can look that one up if you want. And possibly put a link in the chat. I'm not sure. We'll see. Give it a try. Getting no... Oh, I've read that bit. Lightly falling rain. She peeped into the cart shed where the hens were scratching among the loose straw. Certainly Peggy was not there. She searched in the kitchen garden, but there was nothing to be seen except the daffodils nodding their innocent heads under the gooseberry bushes. Round through the orchard she sped, bringing down a shower of cherry blossom as she brushed against the low-growing trees, and greatly disturbing a robin who was feeding a young family in a hole in the ivy, but without any sign of the truant. Here and there Lillian rang, hunting in all Peggy's favourite haunts, now peeping into a hollow yew tree, now peering at the top of a ladder, now rummaging in the tool shed, then back through the sand quarry into the stackyard where there was a very good chance that the young lady might be hidden away in some snug little hole among the hay. But though Lillian got a tolerable amount of hayseed into her hair, her efforts were fruitless. I'm just going to interrupt here and say I'm thinking that the stackyard is the haystacks where they stored the hay. There you go. Carrying on. Her efforts were fruitless, and she was just turning away hot and out of breath to give up the useless search when the sound of a low, chuckling laugh attracted her to the barn. The door was slightly ajar, and she peeped in. On the floor among the straw sat a little boy of between 8 and 9 years old, gazing with rapturous delight into the rafters of the roof. Following the direction of his eyes, Lillian glanced up and beheld a sight which made her gasp in horror. The barn was a very large one, and was spanned by a great crossbeam which ran across the whole length from one end to the other. Mounted on this, fully 15 feet above the ground, a small girl was slowly walking along. Her grey eyes bright with excitement, her brown curls flying in wild disorder, and her arms stretched out on either side to balance herself as she went on her perilous journey. Lillian gazed at her spellbound. She did not dare to speak or move, lest by some mischance the frail little creature should lose its nerve and come crashing down onto the stone floor below. The child herself, however, did not seem to be troubled with the slightest fear, for she walked on as steadily as if the beam had been a plain turnpike road. Giving a shout of triumph as she reached the crossbar and slid down the ladder onto the ground. Turnpike. There's a word. Now, I want to find a plugin that allows me to type a word into chat and it comes back with a short definition. So if you know of one, let me know. A turnpike. Okay, let's try a turnpike road. It's not quite the same thing. A road on which a toll was collected at a toll gate. Toll. And the turnpike itself was the toll gate. There you go. Right, carrying on with the story. Sorry about the croaky voice. I think it's because I haven't been talking much the last 2 days. The child herself, however, did not seem to be troubled with the slightest fear, for she walked on as steadily as if the beam had been... Oh, I'm reading the same paragraph. Yeah, sorry about that. Hi, Auntie. Great to have you here. No worries if you go fast asleep. Great to have you here anyway. If you need to sleep, do it. If I can lull you to sleep with talking, me reading, then that's even better. The beam had as if the beam had been a plain turnpike road, giving a shout of triumph as she reached the crossbar and slid down the ladder onto the ground. Hurrah, hurrah, cried Bobby, clapping his hands in an ecstasy of admiration. It's Peggy turned round with a radiant face. "It's perfectly easy," she exclaimed. "I could do it over again. Now, Bobby, you come up and try." But here Lillian's pent-up excitement and wrath burst forth. "For shame, Peggy," she cried. If you want to break your own neck, you shan't break Bobby's at any rate. Don't you know what a horribly dangerous thing you have been doing? And the idea of you're walking along there with your bootlace dangling down in that way. You're really getting too old for these silly tricks. One can't look after you like a baby. Aunt Helen would be angry if she heard of this." Okay, right. Peggy sat down on the bottom rung of the ladder. The triumph had faded from her face and left something not nearly so pleasant to look at behind. "All right," she said defiantly. "Go along and tell Aunt Helen if you like. I don't care." "Peggy, how horrid you are. Do I ever tell? Didn't I wash and iron your pinafore yesterday when you fell into the pig trough and nobody even suspected? I call you right down..." Oh, okay, a different usage of the phrase. Downright is what we would say now, which I'm going to use for now because it makes more sense. "I call you downright mean to go saying things like that." And Lillian's pretty face flushed quite pink in righteous indignation. Peggy had the grace to look rather ashamed of herself. "No, Lil, you're a dear. You don't tell tales," she said, "and I haven't forgotten about the pinafore. Promise me then that you won't go playing such mad pranks again and leading Bobby into them too." "All right. Anything for a quiet life," said Peggy. "But promise properly." "There, on my honour, I will never walk along that beam again or let Bobby do it either. Will that suit you?" Lillian heaved a sigh of relief, for whatever might be Peggy's sins and misdeeds, her word once given was not lightly broken. "I've been looking for you everywhere," she said. "Aunt Helen sent me to fetch you in at once, and I've been such a long time in finding you, I'm afraid she'll be ever so cross." "What does she want me for?" "To darn your stockings. Oh, Peggy, how could you go and hide all those pears away under the dressing table? It was really silly, for you might have known Aunt Helen would be sure to hunt them out, and now she's fearfully angry and says you'll have to sit and mend away till they're all finished, and she won't let me help you either." Rather than doing one or two at a time, she's now got to do all of them. Peggy sighed philosophically. "I suppose I shall have to come," she said, getting up and shaking the straw out of her hair. "Never mind. I'd really rather mend them all in one big heap than in a lot of little horrid pottering times. It spoils one's Saturday so. Aunt Helen said if I found Bobby, he was to come in too and learn his Latin." That gives you the timing on this book. He's a little boy and he's learning Latin. Not in my day and age, it wasn't happening. Anyway, continued Lillian, looking round, but that youth had prudently disappeared at the first hint of Saturday duties and was nowhere to be seen. Little Bobby, not unsmart. He knew what was going on. Peggy chuckled. "I'm afraid you won't find him," she remarked, "and it's no use looking. He's got the most lovely hiding place in the world that he goes to when he doesn't want to be told to come in. I only found it out by accident myself, and I promised wild horses shouldn't wrench the secret from me. Come along, we may as well go and get the scolding over." And the young lady tossed back her tangled locks, shook her fist at the anticipated pile of darning, then put on an air of chastened and becoming meekness. As being most likely to soothe Aunt Helen's wrath, she marched sturdily into the house. It was a beautiful old home into which Peggy entered, half castle, half farmhouse, with an air of having seen better days about it. A little bit like the house in our last story. Oh, well done on the puzzle. Old-fashioned luggage from Chris Lowe Photos on Shutterstock. And I shall find you another one. Let's see, what sort of puzzle shall I see if I can find? It's a little bit of a challenge sometimes. let's go for this one. I don't think we've had this one before, so we'll get that one set up. Would you like a few more puzzle pieces this time? That was 100 pieces, the last one. This one is starting at 112. I'm just going to go back and have another look at the original. I think you could probably do a few more pieces without it being a problem. I'll go set it to 135. There you go. Copy link, close that bit, paste it into the command center. I think I called it that last time. That's going to be the name, I suppose. Command center, let's write that down. Right, there you go, ready to go. If you do want another one. And we'll carry on with the story. It was a beautiful old home into which Peggy entered, half castle, half farmhouse, with an air of having seen better days about it. The quaint, timbered roof, with its carved gables and red-tiled roof, was built in at one end into a kind of square tower or keep. I'm getting very strong flashbacks to the previous story we had with a place like this. Namely, not Harding's Luck, that's the sequel. The House of Arden. That's right, that's what it was called. That one had a bit of a tower at one end and a bit of a castle at one end actually, and it had a house at the other, just for something different. I'm just scrolling through and seeing if there's going to be anything else that would be suitable that's a similar sort of a feel. Sometimes if I know a story beforehand, if I know it well, or if I've already got the feel of it, then it's quite easy to actually pick up on a new set of jigsaw puzzles for it, because I already know what sort of thing to look for. Otherwise, it's like, oh, what are we going to do now? I'm just having a quick scroll through in case there's anything else I can get us set up with for later, so I know where to get started from. And then we'll carry on reading. Right, and I think we'll go on from there. Quaint timbered house with its carved gables and red-tiled roof was built in at one end into a kind of square tower or keep, with tiny turret windows and winding staircase, getting just a little ruinous in places, but held firmly together by masses of ivy which clung round it like a green mantle. Beyond the tower lay the remains of an abbey, more ancient than the keep. Most of it had been carried away to build the large barns and stables, but the foundations could still be plainly traced, with here and there part of a wall thickly covered with ivy, the ruins of a shattered column, a delicate little piece of window tracery, or a few steps of corkscrew staircase. Sorry, having trouble with my words there for a minute. There were rows and heaps of mossy stones covered with nettles and elder bushes, with patches of green grass in between, where the cows grazed and the pigeons flew about, cooing gently. In the ivy the jackdaws were always busy, and the children had many a perilous climb, trying to reach the coveted nests. The earliest primroses grew here, and beds of sweet violets under the ruined walls, and there were so many turns and corners and sheltered nooks that it made the grandest play place in the world for anyone who loved a game at hide and seek. I can imagine. This is the sort of place that I remember going and visiting and seeing. it's a little bit hard to find you a picture of something that's specifically along those lines. But I've visited a lot of places like this over the years, especially when we were living in England, because that's where there is a profusion of them. Just trying to find where I got up to. For anyone who loved a game at hide and seek, on the other side of the house stretched the garden, such a sweet, old-fashioned garden, where roses, lilies, and gillyflowers were all mixed up with the currants and gooseberries and cabbages. Gillyflowers, I know what that is, but I can't remember. So we're going to find out. Gillyflower or carnation. There you go. Did you know that? They're that old as a style of flower. Right, gillyflowers. Now, where is that word? I need to find it again. Mixed up with currants and... I think I turned the page when I didn't need to. On the other side of the house stretched the garden with such a... stretched the garden. Such a sweet, old-fashioned garden where roses, lilies and gillyflowers were all mixed up with the currants and gooseberries and cabbages. It was somewhat neglected, it is true, but perhaps it looked none the less picturesque for that, and certainly no one would be disposed to quarrel with the beautiful ripe strawberries and the sweet little yellow gooseberries with the hairy skins, or the big red plums that hung upon the old brick walls. Brick walls are great around gardens because they catch the heat from the sun during the day and keep releasing it longer into the evening so that the plants actually have more warmth for growing, and it extends their growing season, especially fruit trees. Inside, the house was large and roomy, with rambling passages and odd little windows and unexpected corners. There was a large oak staircase with wide, shallow steps leading to a panelled gallery where hung swords and rusty armour and moth-eaten tapestry and many an ancient relic of the past, while in the best bedroom was a great carved four-poster bed hung with faded yellow curtains, where Queen Elizabeth herself was said to have slept in much state for 2 nights on her journey from Shrewsbury to Wrexham. That gives us a clue. Let's go and find out. I want to know. Map. Here we go. Turn on map. Interact with map. Let's find out where Wrexham and Shrewsbury are. I know they're in England. Oh, goodness. So, I'm going to put this over here a little bit so you can see it. Here we have the United Kingdom, the British Isles, whichever you want to refer to the various entities here. There's London, there's Birmingham. Okay, this is Wales, this lump out here, which is basically from... No, it's this lump here. That's Wales in there somewhere, okay? So if I come in here, so that's the Welsh border runs down this way here. And if we keep going, so the northern end of Wales, there's Liverpool up there, there's Wrexham, and there's Shrewsbury. So where they are living, yeah, that's Shrewsbury. Sorry, I was just trying to make it a little bit clear in my mind. So if Queen Elizabeth I was going from Shrewsbury to Wrexham, from Shrewsbury to Wrexham, then that means that house is somewhere in this section here. Okay, that makes sense. I always wondered where that was. Right, now I just need to find my mouse, turn off the map and carry on reading. Here we go. Not that, sorry. Put that over there. Right, carrying on. So, that kind of gives us an idea. That's West Midlands, Welsh borders, the northern end of that area. So that's, yeah, there was a little bit of fighting around there at one stage, which would explain why the house had a tower of a keep. A keep is the central part of a castle-style fortification, where you have a wall around the outside and then a central tower and all that sort of stuff. The tower part is referred to often as the keep. And so that's what that is. And then the house has been built outwards from there, and then they've got all these broken down bits of ruined building. The big drawing room had been shut up for many years. The Queen Anne chairs and china cabinets were swathed in wrappers, and the ornaments put away in boxes, but sometimes the children would steal in and open the shutters to look at the portraits which hung upon the oak-panelled walls, stately gentlemen with wigs and lace frills, whose eyes seemed to follow you about the room, haughty dames with powdered hair and patches, stiff little girls in hoops and mittens, and pretty young ladies attired as shepherdesses or classic goddesses, with cupids and nymphs in the background, different artistic styles that they used to do portraits in. I would guess that the author has seen a lot of these sort of home galleries herself, even if it's just visiting stately houses. The little blue drawing room, which was always used instead of the big drawing room, which was closed up, was a far more cheery apartment with its sunny French window and fresh muslin curtains and the blue chintz covers on the chairs. Now, muslin is a very, very light woven fabric. It tears very easily, but it's one that works as a light diffuser. So often it would be hung over large windows so that you had light coming into the room without it being glaring sunlight. And chintz was a fabric that was commonly used on cushion covers and even on the actual seats themselves. It's just something that you hear of. What is chintz? Chintz is a woodblock printed, painted, stained or glazed calico textile that originated in Golconda in the 16th century. So chintz of these earlier eras had a pattern to it that was printed on it. In my youth, it meant something that was a lightweight fabric that was used for furnishing, like on cushions, but it had this shiny finish to it, where they talked about it being glazed. And I would say that even in these earlier stages, it was glazed. What we think of as calico is probably a little bit different to what they were using that was calico back then. We'll see if it's relevant. We'll carry on with the story. So French window and fresh muslin curtains and the blue chintz covers on the chairs probably don't have a pattern on them then. They're just plain blue. But of all the rooms, I think the quaintest was the kitchen. It was by far the oldest part of the house. The great beams of the roof, roughly hewn out with an axe and black with age, had been a portion of the ancient castle, and so had the mullioned windows with their deep old-fashioned seats and diamond panes. Mullions are the different sections in a window that separate it so you can have different parts. So it's a strong frame, but you have a big overall window, and then you have a mullion, which might divide it into two. So that piece through the middle, the mullion, would mean that these areas here are smaller, so therefore the glass isn't going to fall out or get broken as easily. They didn't have plate glass in those days. It was blown glass, often yeah, blown on the round, blown through glass blowing techniques, and so you inflate it and then you actually cut one part of it and then spread it out, which is why you see those bullseye panes in certain sorts of shops, oldie fashioned sweet shops and tea shops in England, where you'll have a pane of glass that's this big and it will have a big lump of glass in the middle and then circles around it like pond circles. And that's from the centre part of where they were blowing the glass to make a flat pane. But because of that, there was a lot more irregularity across the thickness of the glass as it went out. And because glass was a lot more fragile in the old days, it made more sense to make things with small panes. So even if they couldn't do the bigger ones, they would have done the diamond panes, and then from there they would have got to bigger and bigger pieces as they actually developed their glass making techniques. And that's all aside, but you can look up glass for yourself and find out. So that was all because I was talking about mullions. So the deep mullioned windows with their old-fashioned seats and diamond panes filled with green, uneven glass. It looked a cheerful place with its polished oak dresses and shining brasses, and on a winter's evening when the shutters were closed and the settle drawn close to the fire, the settle is like a sofa or a settee. That's probably where settee has come from, but it's usually with a hard seat to it. And it may have a wooden back. It's not a bench, it's more of a seat with a back to it. And it was just a term that was used for those sort of seats that were used in kitchens and stuff like that, where you could sit on it, but it was not all padded and therefore going to get horribly greasy and dirty in the kitchen. So in winter, when the shutters were closed and the settle drawn close to the fire, it seemed the cosiest spot in the world, and Peggy and Bobby would often escape from the sober atmosphere of the dining room to pull their little stools into the ingle nook and listen to Nancy's wonderful tales of ghosts and goblins, which seemed twice as thrilling when the wind was howling like a banshee in the chimney and rattling the doors till they could fancy that spirit fingers were tapping on the panels and only waiting a chance to catch them in the dark passages, and sent such cold shivers running down their backs that they grew almost too frightened to go to bed. Now, an inglenook is where you have a great big fireplace space with a fire set within it. Often it will have a metal plate back and a grate that holds the fire into the central part. But it's almost like you're sitting underneath the open the chimney with its narrowing. And so it's a warmer space because you're right near the fire, and it's a smaller, half enclosed space, and then the heat radiates out into the room. Inglenook. That's what that's the general idea that most people have in their minds when you think inglenook. Below the house, the meadow sloped down to a river where a stone bridge led to the village, with its pretty thatched cottages and Norman church, whose square tower stood up like a beacon for the surrounding country, and away in the distance, tier upon tier, rose the Welsh mountains, fading from green to purple, or from purple to misty mauve, till the last were lost in the hazy blue of the sky. There you go. So yes, they're on the Welsh borders. Now, the Norman period was the period when the Normans had invaded England, so that started with William the Conqueror, and so there was a whole lot of building went on after they were in England, and so they brought with them their own building style, and it became a localized style. And you go to certain places in England and you see things and you go, that's Roman, that's Norman, that's Gothic, whatever. And because of the shape of the arches in the church or the way the roof is built, all that sort of thing. And it becomes very distinctive. You go somewhere and you know that part of this place was settled or developed when there were certain people were in charge in this area. Right. Gorswen Abbey, as Peggy's home was called, had been an important place in its time, hence the castle, and an air of sleepy grandeur seemed to still hang about the old walls, as if sometime it might rouse itself from its lethargy and take its part in the world again. No one could remember when Vaughans had not lived at the Abbey, so that must be their surname, Vaughan. There were tombs in memory of them in a side transept of the church. Stalwart crusaders lying with legs crossed. That's where they've got their feet down like this at the end of the tomb. Sorry, like this at the end of the tomb. I don't know why, it's just the way they were done. Maybe it symbolised how they died, supposedly. Stalwart crusaders lying with legs crossed and meek hands folded in prayer. Stout Elizabethan squires and their dames with ruffs around their necks and rows of prim little kneeling children beneath them, full-faced Jacobean worthies in curled wigs with sculptured cherubs weeping over extinguished torches, and there was a high old pew with a carved canopy over it, and an escutcheon bearing a coat of arms with a dragon on it. Escutcheon. We're getting all the words today, aren't we? At least I knew how to say that one. Escutcheon. What is escutcheon? A shield or emblem bearing a coat of arms. Also a flat piece of metal for protection and often ornamentation around a keyhole, door handle or light switch, because we don't have coats of arms around the place these days, so we just call those other things that because we want to use the word, I suppose. Maybe? I don't know. You never know with these things. Right. We appropriate words and use them in modern uses, and often they completely lose their context. Right. I said that. And an escutcheon bearing a coat of arms with a dragon on it, which, when Peggy was very little, she had always associated with the dragon in the Book of Revelation, and had an uneasy feeling that its eye was upon her all service time. And if she did not behave properly, it might come down in great wrath and devour her. There had been Vaughans who fought in the Wars of the Roses, Vaughans who threw in their lot with King Charles and helped to beat Cromwell at Atherton Moor, Vaughans who had joined the Young Pretenders force. Well done on the puzzle, well done. House and Garden in England by Jenny Photo at Shutterstock. I shall get you another one. I did have some others. This one looks interesting. I don't think we've done this one before. Oh, and if you're on YouTube wondering what I'm talking about with jigsaw puzzles, that's because we run jigsaw puzzles on the live stream so that people have something to do with their eyes and their hands while they're listening to the story. And if you think that sounds very appealing, you are most welcome to come and join us. twitch.tv/jevvv with 3 V's, JEVVVNZ. No spaces, no stops, no nothing else. And that will get you to my channel. And if you follow me, then Twitch will tell you when I am live so that you'll be able to join in some other time. And that's saved for your next one for you, ready to go. Sorry, I'm just doing a little bit of computer housekeeping here and then I'll carry on. Right. And I remembered to allow chatting today, so I don't need anyone to tell me about that. So that's good. No, I don't want that at the moment. Sorry, my computer's telling me something wants to update, and it'll have to wait its time because I'm not going to allow updates while I'm streaming. So there. Vaughans who threw in their lot with King Charles and helped to beat Cromwell at Atherton Moor. Excuse me, burping again. Vaughans who had joined the Young Pretenders force and had lost their heads as their reward. There was no end to the stories which the children could sometimes cajole out of old David, the farm help, who had all the family history at his fingertips. It's interesting seeing how language usage has changed. It's not just big words like escutcheon, but phrases for things like finger ends instead of fingertips. and that sort of thing. There was something else at the beginning of the story where it was like, oh, that was right. That was the a two-word phrase where we use the two the other way round now. It's just, it's quirky, just how things change like that in lots of different ways. Right, we'll carry on. But they had been a happy-go-lucky spendthrift race, loving to ride to hounds and to entertain liberally, better than to look after their affairs. Oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear. The only dictionary bot command I could find is an Urban Dictionary one, lol. Yeah. Might not be such a good idea after all, but knowing what some of the definitions they come up with are. I know when we had family filters on, it wouldn't let us get anything from there at one stage just because, yeah. It would be really good. I need to ask some of my other streamer friends if they've come across any other ones apart from that one. But thank you for letting me know about that. Actually, Q, if you want to DM me that on Discord or something like that, or even just put it in general chat, the information about it, then I can have a look at that and then I can at least say, look, something like this sort of stuff. Or maybe there's something in the coding that can actually allow you to be able to pull from a different source. Anyway, we'll see. It would be cool if we can do something like that because then it can just go straight into the chat and I don't have to worry about turning away and putting it into another search engine and all that sort of stuff. Thank you. Sorry about that. Anyway, I'll carry on with reading. So, but they had been a happy-go-lucky spendthrift race, loving to ride to hounds and to entertain liberally, better than to look after their affairs. Little by little, the fine property had been wasted away, till, when Peggy's father succeeded to the estate, he found it to consist of scarcely more than the old house with the surrounding farm and woodlands, together with such a multitude of debts, mortgages, and other encumbrances that it was truly a barren heritage. There's a lot of estates that have gone that way over the years. Itchy nose. Robert Vaughan, however, was a man of strong will and much determination. Goodness me. I can imagine. Some of the grit of the old crusaders was left in his blood, and instead of taking his solicitor's advice and selling the place for what it would fetch, he resolved to farm the land himself, and by using every care and economy to free the property and raise it to its former level in the county, he worked in his own fields, ploughing, harvesting, and reaping, toiling harder than any of his labourers, and living in as plain a manner as possible. Reduce your outgoings and you're more likely to actually reduce your debt. To those friends who thought he lost caste thereby because he was labouring instead of working in a higher level job, yes, it was very much a class ridden society around the 1900s, the turn of the century from the 1800s to the 1900s. And that's the reference to caste in this case. We know it more specifically now, well, in my part of the world, we know it more specifically now to do with the Indian subcontinent because it's still much more part of their day-to-day life. They have quite strict, I don't know if they still have, some parts of India I think still do, quite strict caste barriers, rules about who can be seen with who and who can have any connection with somebody else. You definitely don't marry across castes and stuff like that. And so modern understanding is to do with India, but that used to be very common throughout a lot of the Western world as well. It's just we called it the class system rather than the caste system when we look back on it. To those friends who thought he lost caste thereby, he had always the same argument, that he saw no reason why the cultivation of fields should counteract the habits of refinement and good breeding to which he had been reared. That in the colonies educated gentlemen set to work to labour with their hands and are thought none the worse of, so why not in England? where land is good and markets are plentiful, especially when it involved the keeping of a fine old property which had been in the family for so many hundreds of years. There you go. Fortune, however, had been against him. Several bad seasons and a spell of disease among the cattle had made all the difference between profit and loss. And at the time this story begins, Robert Vaughan realised that any unusual run of ill luck might bring matters to a crisis and render vain the struggle of so many years. The children, however, knew little of the shadow which haunted their home, for they had lived as yet in that happy, thoughtless paradise which is the inheritance of true childhood, where a new rabbit in the hutch or an extra treat on a holiday is of far more importance than any grown-up affair. Their mother had faded so early from their young lives that she was scarcely more than a tender memory, and her place had been taken by dear, pretty Aunt Helen, father's younger sister, who did her best to train them up in the way they should go. Aunt Helen fondly imagined herself to be a great disciplinarian, but her own lively youth was still such a recent remembrance that her eyes were wont to twinkle, and the corners of her mouth to twitch in the middle of her severest scoldings, and the children always had a feeling that so long as they did not do anything rude or wrong, or run into any very imminent danger, their escapades were secretly condoned by their aunt, who admired pluck and spirit, however much she might feel it incumbent upon her to lecture them. Gentle Lillian gave little trouble, and Bobby, Aunt Helen often declared, would be easy enough to manage alone, but where Peggy led he was always sure to follow, and the end was generally mischief of some sort or another. Oh dear, she sounds a little bit like William, doesn't she? The worst of it was poor Peggy really did not mean to be naughty. She was so eager, so active, so full of overflowing and impetuous life, with such restless, daring and abounding energy, that in the excitement of the moment her wild spirits were apt to carry her away, simply because she never stopped to think of consequences. She had always 100 projects on hand, each one of which she was ready to pursue with unflagging zeal and that absorbing interest which is the secret of true enjoyment. Let her alone, the rector, who rejoiced in Peggy, was wont to say, one of the people that they knew who enjoyed her being her. Don't prune her too hard, for it is sometimes the side shoots that bear the best flowers. After all, she is like a young growing plant, a little too much leaf at present, but I see a grand promise of blossom, and she'll turn out a fine woman in the end. Happily, both her father and Aunt Helen shared his views, and knowing Peggy's generous, affectionate nature, were able to lead her more by love than by severity. For with human hearts it is often like the fable of the sun and the wind. They will respond to a kindly touch, while harshness will only make them sullen and obstinate. Very perceptive in that day and age that this is written, to actually have that attitude about things. It wasn't completely unheard of, but it was definitely not the dominant school of thought to do with raising children and how you treated them. They further held the opinion that it is better for a child to have many interests and much energy, even though these qualities prove a little troublesome, than to grow up clipped to the prim pattern of those who may have outlived their enthusiasms. Yes, so often there are adults in people's lives who restrict the children so much because they've lost their own enthusiasm for life. They have forgotten what it's like to be so caught up in the moment and to appreciate that. And so it's nice to hear an author from this era, the 1900s, the early 1900s, actually saying that this is a good thing. Such natures as Peggy's taste life to the full. For them it is never a stale or worthless draught. Each moment is so keenly lived that time flies by on eager wings, and though there may be stormy troubles sometimes, as a rule the spirit dwells, like the swallows, in an upper region of joy, which is scarcely dreamt of by those who cannot soar so high. There you go. Right, I am going to press on with the next chapter. If you need to, quickly rush off and get whatever it is that you need. Um, but I'm going to get reading again fairly soon so that we can actually complete this next chapter. Mainly because otherwise it's going to be too long. I'm hoping we won't have quite so many intriguing words to look up. Okay, A Terrible Tomboy by Angela Brazel. Chapter 2, Birds Nesting. The busy birds, with nice selection cull, soft thistledown, grey moss, and scattered wool, far from each prying eye the nest prepare, formed of warm moss and lined with softer hair. It's the opening poem for the chapter. A lot of earlier books actually used to have like a little poem or a verse from a poem, a stanza, at the beginning, at the opening. Peggy and Bobby sat at the top of a high apple tree in a cunning little seat just where one bough crossed another, and bending up formed a kind of armchair with a back to it. Below them the pink apple blossoms spread like a rosy cloud against the bluest of skies, and a blackbird in a neighbouring bush was trilling his loudest. Easter had fallen late, so that the children's spring holidays were not yet over when the first early delightful days of May brought a foretaste of the coming summer. Peggy and Bobby were out the whole day long, following their father about the farm, riding on the slow plough horses, helping to drive the sheep or bringing home the cows from the pasture, sowing seeds in their little gardens, and generally revelling in the delicious freedom. Sometimes Lillian would join them, but more often she was busy indoors helping her aunt and Nancy the maid, and learning the mysteries of housekeeping and dairy minding, for she was growing quite a nice little companion to Aunt Helen, and becoming so useful that Nancy declared they should scarcely know what to do without her when the term began again. School term. "What shall we do this afternoon?" said Bobby, leaning back amongst the branches in a way that would have brought Aunt Helen's heart to her mouth had she not long ago come to the conclusion that small boys have 9 lives, like a cat. "I don't know," replied Peggy, idly picking off bits of twig and throwing them at the old gander, which had strayed underneath. A gander is a male goose. As a collective, you call them geese, but otherwise it's a goose and gander. Male and female and male. "Then let's go birds nesting. You can't think how dreadfully I want to find a cuckoo's egg. Arthur Hill has one at school and he's so proud of it. He wouldn't change it, though a boy offered him 5 sticks of mint rock and a pea shooter. I'm sure we ought to get one about here. I've heard such lots of cuckoos lately. We'll look in every nest we find. Now, here's where we get to the stuff which is not up to our modern standards, okay? Birds nesting is where you raid a bird's nest for an egg, for collection purposes. Not really in line with our modern conservation ideas, although cuckoos can be a real problem because they kick out the eggs of the bird that created the nest and put their own eggs in there and leave the other bird to raise their chicks, the cuckoo's chicks. So probably less of a problem if you've got a lot of cuckoos in the area. Anyway, we'll carry on. "I've heard such a lot of cuckoos lately. We'll look in every nest we find." "All right, we'll go down the meadows by the river into the hazelwood." No, up the hill, over the gorse common, and down the yew tree lane." "You won't find any nests up there," said Peggy. "Yes, I shall. I tell you won't, and I tell you I shall. You were only 8 last January, and I shall be 12 in November, so I ought to know best," said Peggy, crushingly. "I don't care if you're 100, replied Bobby with scorn. "Joe was up there last night, and he found 12 nests, and what's more, he told me just where they all are." "Then why couldn't you say so at first? Are you sure you can find them?" "Certain, and one of them's a long-tailed tits, with ever so many eggs in it. Do you want to go down by the river now?" "No," replied Peggy, giving in graciously. "A bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush, and if Joe really found the nests up there, it's worthwhile going to see." Bobby climbed down in triumph, for Peggy so generally took the lead that it was sweet for once to get his own way. He was rather a gentle little boy, ready as a rule to follow at Peggy's bidding and to make a lively second to any scheme she might have in hand. Aunt Helen sometimes thought the two must have got changed and that Peggy should have been the boy and Bobby the girl, for though the latter was not without courage, it was certainly Peggy who had the most of that enterprising spirit which is generally thought of a characteristic of the masculine mind. Keep in mind that at this time in the 1900s, early 1900s, that was very much a common perception that girls were feminine and boys were masculine, and that was it. Growing up as a tomboy, have to disagree with that. Though she would not have minded being a genuine boy, Peggy had the greatest objection to being called a tomboy, a term of reproach that had been hurled at her head from the earliest infancy by indiscriminating friends. Yes, by the time I came along, it wasn't so much a term of reproach, it was just a general recognition that that's a girl, but that girl enjoys doing activities that a lot of the boys prefer to do, like climbing trees and going camping and stuff like that, instead of knitting and making gardens and sewing and mending and doing laundry and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, no, I'd much rather do the running around outside stuff, even if I wasn't highly energetic. So yeah, it wasn't a problem. The terminology wasn't a problem by my growing up time, but that's a lot later than where this girl is. If they meant anything nice by it, I shouldn't care, she complained, but they don't, for a tomboy is a horrid, rough sort of creature who isn't fit to be either a boy or a girl. It's too bad that I can't even do useful things without people howling at me. Mrs. Davenport looked perfectly shocked when I harnessed the pony, though I told her Joe was milking and there was no one else to come and do it. And when old Mr. Cooper saw me help father drive cows down to the pasture, he popped out with Miss Tomboy at once, though he did say afterwards I was the right sort of girl. People didn't call Joan of Arc and Grace Darling tomboys, though they did other things besides stay at home and darn stockings. Why can't I climb trees and jump fences and enjoy myself like boys do, and yet be a thorough girl all at the same time? She doesn't want to lose who she is, but part of who she is also enjoying those things. I agree. To do Peggy justice, I think she was right, for though she delighted in outdoor life, she was in no sense a rough or ill-mannered child, which is how the term was used back then. Wonderful! That's a ruined abbey with a garden in it. There you go. Beauport Abbey in Brittany, France. We shall find another. This one looked like it was a lovely one to do. And then we'll carry on. And no, you are not required to do the jigsaw puzzles, but if you would like to do the jigsaw puzzles, that's okay. $117. I won't go too big, too many pieces. There it is. And saved, and command is good to go. Right. Carrying on. I'm just trying to find where I got to. To do Peggy justice, I think she was right, for though she delighted in outdoor life, she was in no sense a rough or ill-mannered child, and loved pretty things and dainty ways as well as quiet Lillian. But it was a case of a dog with a bad name, for however indignantly she might remonstrate, people had got into the habit of dubbing her Tomboy, and at that valuation she seemed likely to remain. The walk which Bobby had proposed this afternoon was somewhat of a scramble, for the country rose behind the abbey into undulating hills. So the country rose, no, not roses, but countryside. The hill rose behind them. Behind the abbey into undulating hills, which were fairly steep, though not so high as the Welsh mountains. Sorry, I've got something on in the slow cooker, and it's finished its cooking, but it's okay to carry on. into undulating hills which were fairly steep, though not so high as the Welsh mountains, and were covered with for the most part with gorse and rough grass. Where the sheep and young bullocks were turned out to graze, it was rather a stiff pull up to the common, but the Vaughans were as accustomed to climbing as mountain goats, and would have thought it far more wearisome to walk the length of a London street. Yes, if that's your normal surroundings, you're used to it, that is something that's okay for you, unlike being in the city for some of us. Halfway up was a spot very dear to the children's hearts. At a turn of the road, a great slab of Welsh slate stone lay at a sloping angle, shelving down for a distance of about 20 feet. Sorry, I'm just checking in case the picture that I thought I needed next is one that I need to do now. No, not yet. Sorry. I do have a picture. I just don't know when it's coming. It was the frontispiece, but it's further on in the story. Trying to find it. Yeah. Still, many people who believe women shouldn't wear shorts or pants sure has carried a long way. Absolutely. It's astonishing. The limitations that they put on women because they are not women. If they were women, they would not put those limitations on women. And there are some women who've picked up on them because they think it's the right thing. But if they were given complete and utter freedom, it wouldn't be an issue. Right. At the turn of the road, a great slab of Welsh slate stone lay at a sloping angle, shelving down for a distance of about 20 feet, and with its surface so flat and even, and so smooth and polished by the weather, that it made a natural sliding board, down which it was delightful to toboggan at full speed. What we call a slide, they used to call a sliding board because it was made by propping up a board for sliding on, but it had a polished surface, usually made out of a piece of wood. That's why it was a board. It was delightful to toboggan at full speed. It seemed expressly formed for the enjoyment of small boys and girls, for as it lay across a corner, you had only to walk up the road to get to the top, and then settling yourself firmly with feet straight in front, you let go and slid like a bolt from an arrow, down, down, till you found your feet on the road again, and could climb up once more and repeat the performance. So you got the road goes like this, and then it goes like this, and then this stone is a cross between the two bits of road as it goes round the corner. Sorry, two bits of road as it goes round, whichever way I drew it. Anyway, you can do it in your head. Of course, and repeat the performance. Of course, it was not very nice, for the backs of boots and knickerbockers and frocks and pinafores were apt to get sadly torn if they caught on a projecting angle. But what child ever thought of clothes when a 20-foot slide might be enjoyed? Certainly not Peggy or Bobby, whose well-worn garments were generally made of the stoutest and most serviceable materials. They spent quite half an hour at this enthralling pastime, till a very persistent cuckoo in a little copse over the hedge recalled them to the principal object of their ramble. "Come along," shouted Peggy. "We're wasting time." "Let's take the short cut," said Bobby, hopping nimbly over the fence into the meadow where the kingcups were lying. Kingcups are like buttercups. They're related, but they're not exactly the same. I think they stand up a lot taller and they're a bigger flower. The leaves are different too. Such a bright mass of gold in the sunshine that you might have thought the stars had fallen from the sky and were shining in the fields instead. Little rabbits scuttled away before them into the hedgerows, and a cock pheasant, disturbed in his afternoon nap, flew with a great whir into the coppice opposite by, close by. A coppice is a small wooded area where the trees are grown and then cut down just above the ground level, like a stump, and then the next season more branches grow up from that base, and it's a harvestable forest. You keep going back to it, and every few years you can cut from that same tree, the same tree stump, because the type of wood that it is, the type of tree that it is, keeps on sending up new shoots which grow bigger and stronger, and then you can cut them and use them again for timber for various things, but also for burning to make charcoal, which helps in the heat of the fire for a kitchen, and also for doing things like processing steel and things like iron to make steel and things like that before the days of coal being used. Or if you couldn't get coal, if you couldn't afford coal, then creating charcoal yourself. Not as hot as coal, but still. So a coppice was a managed piece of woods or forest that was used for the wood supply. And it's not like now where they're doing forestry in New Zealand where once the trees are cut down, then the stumps just rot in the ground and then they go along a little bit later and plant some new trees in between those little seedlings and then they grow up and then those cut down. No, these are ones where the tree keeps regrowing from that same root. So it's a lot more renewable, a lot more reusable. It's a great idea, but you have to be growing the right sort of trees for it. So he flew with a great whir into the coppice close by. 2 fields brought them out onto the common, where the gorse was a blaze of colour and the bees were busy buzzing among the sweet-smelling blossom. Joe said there was a yellowhammer's nest just there, close by the elder bush, said Bobby. All right, said Peggy. You take one side of the tree and I'll take the other. A few minutes' search resulted in a delighted shh from Bobby, for on a little ledge of rock, under an overhanging tussock of grass, was the cosiest, cunningest nest in the world, and the yellowhammer herself sat on it, looking at them with her bright little eyes, half undecided whether to stay or fly away in alarm. Peggy crept up as quietly as a mouse. Though the children were very anxious to find nests, it was not in any spirit of ruthless robbery. Mr. Vaughan was a keen naturalist and had taught them to watch the birds in their haunts, but disturb them as little as possible, taking an occasional egg for their collection, but only when there were so many in the nest that it would not be missed. Which was very forward thinking for that era. A lot more of a conservationist than a standard bird's nesters. Isn't she stunning, whispered Bobby, and how tight she sits, like how snugly down in her nest. But a human voice was too much for the yellowhammer, and she flew like a dart into the gorse bushes. 5 eggs, said Peggy, but not one of them are cuckoos. You don't want one, do you, Bobby? No, I've got 3 at home. I had 5, but I swapped 2 of them with Frank Wilson for a redstarts. Come along then, she'll soon fly back when we're gone. I believe she's watching us out of the elder tree. Where did Joe say the long-tailed tits had built? So by not touching the nest, their smell is not on it, and so the bird is going to come back. I'm not sure if she's going to address that later. It depends on the type of bird. Some birds will not come back to their nest if it's got the smell of humans on it. Other ones, if it's only slightly, they will. Right in the middle of a gorse bush, just on the top of the mound where the goat was tethered last year. He calls them bottle tits, but it's just the same thing. Long-tailed tit. A tit in this context is a smallish bird. There are great tits and coal tits, which are the ones with the black heads and then the blue shoulders and white and grey on the front. They're kind of like sparrows, but blue and grey and white coloured. That sort of family of birds. Very, very common in England. But it's just the same thing. Father says, "Phew, isn't this grass scratchy on your legs? Horrid. My boots are full of prickles. I shall have to take them off soon. It's so deep here, it's scratching my very nose," because they're going through the gorse bushes. "Oh, look, Bobby, there goes one of the tits. I saw just where she flew from. Oh, here it is. See, isn't it just the prettiest little nest that ever was?" The tit's nest would certainly have gained the prize if all the birds had been asked to take part in a building competition. It was made of the softest moss and lichens, fashioned together in the shape of a bottle, with the neck downwards, for the tit must have some place in which to bestow her long tail, and she builds her home to suit her person. That's probably why she's called a bottle tit, because she makes a nest that's this sort of shape that hangs down from the branch. Peggy thrust a cautious finger through the tiny opening in the side. "It's full of eggs," she exclaimed. "I should think there must be 7 or 8. I'll take 2, one for you and one for me. They're the smallest you ever saw and so warm. I hope they'll blow easily. Bobby had brought a box full of sheep's wool in his pocket to hold anything they might find, so Peggy laid the eggs in with great pride, for bottle tits were rare in that neighbourhood, and they had long wished to find such a treasure. Joe had certainly not misled them, and Bobby's memory, though defective as regarded Latin declensions and historical facts, was unerring when it was a case of locating birds' nests. He found 3 thrushes' nests low down in the elder bushes, all filled with gaping yellow mouths, the pretty little chaffinches up in the ivy tree with only 2 sparkly eggs as yet, and Jenny Wren's household hidden away in a bank full of so many children that she surely resembled the old woman who lived in a shoe. And it was a marvel how she could remember which little chirping atom she had fed last. The robin had built early and her brood had flown and left the nest empty. But 2 blackbirds were sitting in the hawthorn hedge and flew away with cries of indignation and distress. The cuckoos were still calling loudly in the distance. "Tiresome things," said Bobby. "If they would only build nests like other birds, one might have a chance of finding them." In April the cuckoo comes, in May she'll stay, in June she changes her tune, in July she prepares to fly, come August go she must, quoted Peggy. "But you haven't said it all," put in Bobby, "and if the cuckoo stays till September, it's as much as the oldest man can remember." That's how it finished. "I wish the rhymes would tell us where she lays her eggs," said Peggy. She was poking about in the mossy bank as she spoke when a hedge sparrow flew out from the low bushes almost straight into her face. It did not take Peggy long to find the neat little nest of twisted twigs and grass woven into the fork of a branch. There were 4 lovely blue eggs inside, and a slightly larger one of a greenish-grey colour. Peggy flushed all over with excitement. "Bobby, Bobby!" she screamed. "Come here, quick! I do believe I've found a cuckoo's egg." There seemed little doubt about it, for the egg really looked quite different to the others, so the treasured find was safely put away in the small box to be shown to Joe, who was wise in such lore, though he only knew the birds by their country names and had never heard of such science as ornithology. Quite elated with their success, the children hunted down the lane, searching in every bush and hedgerow, but they found nothing but a few last year's nests full of acorns and dead leaves. They came out by Betsy Owen's cottage, a little low, whitewashed, tumble-down building, standing in the midst of a neglected garden with a very forlorn and deserted air about it. "Joe says no doubt there'll be lots of nests in the ivy there," confided Bobby, peeping through the hedge, "but he wouldn't go in and see, not if you gave him £5 for it." "Why not?" demanded Peggy. Well done on the puzzle. Very good. I like that one. It felt very English to me. I don't know about you. Old Brick House in Somerset, England, by Christian Mueller from Shutterstock. It looks like there is a bridge in front of it too, and a lane. There you go. And we'll find one more. Oh, this one here. Nothing to do with our story in terms of style, but I was amused by it. I'll leave it at 112. There you go. And here is the link for it. And ready to go. And I'll tell you why I chose that one afterwards, once you've seen it, the finished picture. "Why not?" demanded Peggy, about going into the property of Betsy Owen's cottage. "Because old Betsy's a witch, and you never know what she might do if you make her angry." Joe Parker and Evan Williams took some sticks from her hedge last autumn, and she came out in a rage and crossed her fingers at them. And in 6 weeks, John broke his leg, and Evan had sore eyes all the winter. And once Joe and another boy were coming home very late at night past the cottage, and they saw a bright light, and just as they reached the gate it went out, and they heard a most fearful shriek, and they were so frightened they ran all the way home. There's probably logical explanations for all of that, actually. What nonsense, said Peggy. I expect the old woman was blowing out her candle to go to bed, and a screech owl flew over their heads. Joe would have run away from his own shadow. But if you're afraid, stay outside in the lane, for I'm going in to see if there's a nest in that ivy. It looks such a likely place. I don't believe anyone's in the cottage either, for the door's shut. But Bobby much resented such a slur on his manly courage, and insisted upon being the one to climb the ivy-covered chimney. He crept quietly round to the back of the cottage and swung himself up by the thick stems, feeling in every little hole where he could lay his hand. The large old chimney was so wide at the top that he found he could peep right down it, as if he were looking into a well, and could see a good piece of the hearth underneath, with a small fire of sticks burning under a large 3-legged iron pot, and the old woman sitting close by on a low stool, smoking a short clay pipe. This is all adding up to his image of her being a witch, I think. Betsy Owen was a withered, cross-grained, that usually means grumpy, old dame who, by dint of the knowledge of the uses of some simple herbs and a good deal of cunning, had contrived to establish a reputation something between a witch and a quack doctor. People came to her from remote farms to have warts charmed away or the toothache cured. She dressed burns and wounds and concocted lotions for sore eyes and bad legs. Her one room was hung all round with plants in various stages of drying, and she was always ready to prescribe a remedy for an ailing cow or a sick child, generally at much profit to herself, whatever might be the benefit to the sufferer. She was bending over her iron pot now, stirring the concoction with a long-handled spoon. Bobby could see her quite plainly in the firelight. Oh dear, what's going to happen, do you think? And could catch the curious aromatic smell which rose up from the smouldering wood. I do not know what prompted him. Probably the love of mischief, which dwells in all small boys, but he picked up a loose piece of mortar, which was lying on the roof, and dropped it suddenly down the chimney. It fell plump into the iron pot with a loud hissing sound. How to get her riled. Out rushed Betsy from the cottage, scolding furiously. Down dropped Bobby from the chimney and was through a hole in the hedge and away down the lane as fast as his sturdy legs could carry him. Peggy had been waiting in the garden, and before she could realise what had happened, she found herself seized and shaken violently by an angry old woman. I'll larn you to come into other folks' places and drop stones down decent bodies' chimblies, shrieked Betsy. Be off with you, you ill-mannered young good-for-naught, and if I ever catch you here again, you'll get such a hiding you won't forget it for a month. And ignore the particular accent. That was nothing in particular. Peggy was so amazed by the suddenness of the attack that for the moment she offered no resistance, but finding a storm of blows descending on her head like hail, she managed to squirm out of Betsy's ungentle grasp and fled after Bobby down the lane, followed by a shower of epithets from the gate, where the old woman stood shaking her fist until long after the children were out of sight. That's probably going to help keep people away from interfering with her if she keeps doing that sort of thing. When they judged themselves to be at a safe distance, the pair sat down on a fence to get their breath and talk over their adventure. We're in for it now, laughed Peggy. She was so fearfully angry, I'm sure Joe would say she bewitched us. Yes, he'll be in a great state of mind when we tell him. He'll quite expect us to break our arms or legs or necks or something before long. You'll do that without her if you try to swing head downwards on one leg like that, said Peggy, for Bobby was executing some marvellous gymnastics on the top rail of the fence. He came down feet foremost, however, and they sauntered off along the road to the old watermill where the miller's man was slinging a sack of flour onto a patient donkey who stood with drooping ears, eyeing the burden which he must carry far up into the mountains, while his mistress, a little black-eyed Welshwoman, poured forth a torrent of gossip in high-pitched tones. The wheel was standing idle, and the children went down the slippery steps to the pool below. It was cool and dark there, for the trees grew low over the stream, and the water, escaping from the race above, poured down by the side of the wheel in a foaming cataract. A dipper was hopping about from stone to stone, a dipper being a type of bird in this context, from stone to stone in the centre of the stream, pruning her sleek feathers and calling her lively chit, chit to her mate. Peggy grasped Bobby by the arm. "Keep still," she whispered. "Let us watch her. Perhaps she may have a nest somewhere close by." All unconscious of her audience, the little bird jerked her short tail, dived rapidly into the water, and emerging at the other side of the pool, flew suddenly into the green, moss-grown wall which overhung the mill wheel. "That's her nest," cried Bobby. "Oh, don't you see it? It looks just like a great lump of moss. You can hardly tell it from the wall, only I see a little round hole at the bottom. What a shame it's in such a horrid place. We can never get it up there." "Yes, we can," replied Peggy stoutly. "I'm going up." "But how?" "Oh, I can see it all happening now. Up the mill wheel, of course, stupid. No, you're not coming too. You climbed the chimney and it's my turn. Just hold my hat and I'll manage all right. You'll see." It was a slippery climb. Yes, wood that's constantly getting water over it tends to grow slimy stuff on the surface, and it gets very slippery. It was a slippery climb, for the wheel was green with slime, and it needed a long step to get from one blade to the other, but Peggy was utterly fearless, and she had soon pulled herself to the top. Balanced there, she could easily reach to the nest, which was only a few feet away from her. Out flew the dipper in a panic, and in went Peggy's fingers. 3 eggs, Bobby. Lovely white eggs. Look, I think I shall take this one at any rate." She held out her hand to show her prize, but at that instant the mill wheel began to turn, and she was whirled from the dizzy summit down into the dark pool below. Bobby's agonized shrieks brought out the miller's man, who, dashing into the stream, caught the child just as she rose to the surface and before she had drifted into the swifter current further on. It was a very forlorn and draggled Peggy which he laid upon the bank, but she was game to the last. "I haven't broken the egg," she gasped out, with the water streaming from her hair. "Better thank the Lord you're not drowned, miss," said the miller's man, looking ruefully at his own wet garments. He's working in a mill, a flour mill, so all the dust is going to get stuck to him if he goes in there wet. "Let me take you into the house, and Mrs. Griffiths will get you some dry clothes to your back. You'll catch your death of cold sitting there." Peggy essayed to get up and walk, but she was such a very waterlogged vessel that, to hasten matters, her rescuer picked her up in his arms and bore her off like a sack of flour. Stout old Mrs. Griffiths was sitting knitting in the chimney corner, but she jumped up in a hurry when John carried in his dripping burden. "Sakes alive!" she screamed. "What is it? Is she dead? Lay her out on the parlour sofa. Sarah Grace, run for the parish nurse and the rector, quick!" But Peggy's voluble tongue assured her that she was very much alive and only in need of drying. She soon hustled that young lady upstairs and out of her wet clothes. 10 minutes later, Peggy sat on the settle by the kitchen fire, an odd little figure, attired in Sarah Grace's Sunday jacket, over Mrs. Griffith's best red flannel petticoat, and a steaming glass of hot elder wine in her hand. "Just to keep you from catching cold, miss. And Master Bobby must have one too. Bless his heart, he's as white as my apron, and small wonder, after seeing his sister half drowned." And that's the end of the chapter in today's reading. There you go. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, that's a funny one, that chapter. I'm just going to see if I can find a couple of pictures. A settle is a wooden bench, usually with arms and a high back long enough to accommodate 3 or 4 sitters. There you go. I'm finding you a picture. want to see if I can find a picture that shows one at an angle rather than straight on, because it's easier to understand how they were used in the kitchen. A lot of these are collector's items, so they've got velvet cushions on and stuff like that. Nothing like an old one. And find one that's big enough. This one kind of works. Save image, and then I'll show it to you. And I'm quite happily doing this so that you can have enough time to carry on with that puzzle. Picture. Okay, so this, when I turn it on, is a settle. Oh, goodness me, that's a lot bigger than I thought. It looked like a small picture. Obviously, the last one I had was a very small picture, and I made it bigger. So this is a settle of sorts. Sometimes they would have an open piece underneath, otherwise they were just hard wood like this. Sometimes they would have solid arms on the side, and the arms would go up to almost the level of the back, just as a way of yeah, hi Squibble, sorry about that. Yes, you just made it in time for the end. That's okay. You'll be able to have you'll be able to have a listen once we're finished. I'm just filling in a little bit of time showing some pictures to do with it, and giving Blue a little bit of, is it Blue? Yeah, Blue a bit of time to carry on with the puzzle. And you can do the puzzle too if you want to. Just put an exclamation puzzle or exclamation jigsaw, and that should find it for you. There were some other things I was going to find for you. Oh, that's right. I was going to find you a picture of the birds that are called tits, because, you know, some people get all weird and funny about using a word like that. They're actually a particular sort of bird. Here they are. Save this image, and I shall then make it available. That's an odd one. I'm going to have to reformat that. Open with. Let's see if Earthan View can cope with that. Oh, that's another thing I use quite often for a resizing, changing the format and all that sort of thing of images. I don't actually like using Windows' own photo handler. This one looks like it's not going to do it. No, it's not. Right, we won't use that version then. I'll find another version. One of the programs that I use for that sort of thing is called Earthan View. It's by a chap called Earthan. And he created it for his own usage, but he's made it freely available to anyone who wants to use it. And it's great for being able to do batch resizing, some simple adjustments. It's actually very, very powerful, but it's nothing like, you can't compare it with something like Photoshop. It's not that sort of a job that you can do with it. You can't work in layers and things like that. But if you're just using a straight image and you want to crop it or anything like that, it's quite handy. And it's very quick to open and things like that. So Earthan View, and I'll try and remember to put that one in our tech channel, since we're putting things like that in our tech channel. Just finding the right folder again. For some reason, the day that I create a new folder, it doesn't want to actually, here you go. So these are tits. There's a blue tit and a, marsh tit. Got to get it where I can see a bit better. That's a marsh tit. I can see how that one would live well in a marsh, because a lot of the plant life there is shades of brown and green, but mainly shades of brown, and so it would be well hidden. You can see, well, this one's called a blue tit, and that's the most commonly seen one, where it's got the little black band that runs across its eyes. It's got a blue and black cap, but it's got white cheeks and a yellow front, and then the blue back. This one's the long-tailed tit. You can see how it's got a much longer tail than the blue tit. This is the standard measure for most people, is the blue tit. And then you've got the great tit, which looks like it's also a long-tailed one, but possibly actually a slightly bigger bird. This one here is the crested tit, because it's got that little crest on the back of its head. And that one there is the coal tit, where it's more grey and soft beige colour, and then it's got the black head. But body-wise, if you just saw a silhouette of it, you would probably think that it was something like this. And that's all part of it. The birds, perhaps. What was that reference to? I can't remember what I said, sorry. Yeah. I'm trying to think. I'm sure there was something else I was going to show you, which is my favourite. It's a toss-up between a blue tit and a coal tit, just because we used to have both of them that used to come to the garden outside our house where we lived in England, and they're not common where I live in New Zealand. And very cheery, common birds that just sort of bounce around where you are, but just out of reach. A little bit like sparrows do in New Zealand, but not quite so many of them. And often when people would put out feeding for the birds out in the garden, the tits would be birds that would regularly come. And they're very cheepy sort of birds. They're cheep, cheep, cheep type thing. They've probably got a specific sound that they make, but that's the memory I have of them. There you go. Wonderful. Well done on the puzzle. Now, that one there is called... I'll just turn off this picture first. That one there is called... Oh, it didn't give me the name. I'll find it here. Elves' houses in Iceland. 3 tiny houses in Iceland known as the elves' houses. Now, the reason why I put that one up is because I've been to Iceland and it was really quite impressive. There are parts of Iceland, because they don't have lots of trees. They might have done once upon a time. Yes, those birds are very, very cute. They might have had lots of trees at some stage, but that would have been a long time back in their history, because wood was used for fuel for fires to keep warm. So there's not a lot of wood around. And so they built with stone since then, and they get some pretty horrendous weather. And it can get very cold. So it's not uncommon to build a house where it's stone walls, it's set partly in the ground, and then you bank up dirt around it. You have a timber front and a framed roof, and then over the roof you put more turf, and you have that so it grows, and it means that you actually have the warmth that's inside it gets contained within it, and it's also a lot less inflicted on by storms and things like that. You feel a lot, and it would be a lot quieter inside too. Yeah, almost like a hobbit house. Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if it's the same sort of family as the chickadee. If chickadees are about the size of sparrows, then they would be very, very similar. Yeah, natural insulation, absolutely. Anyway, so there we go. We've finished. We've got the puzzle done. And of the red and white of those houses there, the little elf houses, which are actually quite small, they've been built in someone's garden or a park. That's not uncommon in Iceland for traditional style house to have that sort of colour on the woodwork, the red and white. Anyway, so thank you for being here. It's been great having you with me for reading again. And I'm so sorry that I missed it last time, but, you know, as I said, sore tummy and all that sort of stuff. And Squibble's looking forward to possibly listening to the rest of the story after I've finally finished. Yeah, so thanks for being here. Thanks for keeping me company. And I look forward to seeing you next time. Look after yourselves and those around you. Be kind to yourself and happy reading. Bye.